So on this video, we're going to discuss all the pressures and parameters you have on the CardioHealth, and also how you would go by setting up your ranges and what they mean. Remember, on this screen, you have flow that is actually sensed through your flow probe. It's the same place where your bubble is sensed. So your flows are detected through the flow probe. Your pressures, which include your venous pressure, your inlet pressure, and your arterial pressure, are sensed through this black probe right here. So for any reason this probe right here comes out, you're going to lose all of that information because it cannot transfer that information to the actual CardioHealth. This is how you're transferring information. It would look like this. So everything that regards to your pressures are going to just blank out. If you ever see a screen like this, remember maybe something is wrong with this black probe. Many times it's just the fact that it came out or it's loose, and that's why it's not reading it. So try to see if you can put it in. If that doesn't solve it, just switch it out. Now, going over the pressures. Now, on these pressures that you have here, some of these pressures are set as only high priority. One of them is your flows. Your flow ranges are always high priority. You do not have a low priority setting because it's very important for us to know the changes in your flow. That's all you're doing on ECMO, providing flow. So when you go on this screen for the flow, you see high priority and low priority, and that's it. So as soon as it goes out of that range, it's going to give you a high priority no matter what, okay? And that's where you would set it. I usually recommend for flows, go based off of what the physicians have requested. Let's say if they request a range of between 2.5 to 3 liters, do your low at 2.5 and your high at 3 liters. So if it goes out of the range that they prefer, then you're alarmed. Your next parameter is your venous. When you click on this little bulb right here, remember you have to click the bulb. You have two values that are set here. One is considered your low priority alarm and one is your high priority alarm. What that means is when you set these values, when you're on low priority alarm, when it reaches that negative pressure, it's going to give you a yellow beep, beep, beep alarm. And what that means is at this point, something is changing in the patient. You might have to start thinking to address the issue. It's not as critical, but you have to think about resolving the problem. The high priority alarm is when you're past a point where it might affect your flows and you have to address it directly and fast and quick. When you set these values, these are set by you. The machine doesn't know where the values are. You're telling it when to warn you if something is going on. So if these values are set too tight to your compared to your baseline, then you might have these alarms come on and off all the time too frequently. And sometimes it might not even affect your flows, but you're just going to get that alarm just because you've set it too tight. If you set it too broad, too far away from your baseline, sometimes you might see an effect in your flow before you get a high priority or low priority alarm on this. So it is very important for you guys to set these values so you know when is the appropriate time to be notified. So we'll go over that when we're troubleshooting the venous as how we can set these parameters later on. Then you have your inlet pressure. Most inlet pressures and arterial pressures are pretty much similar to one another. And remember, the inlet pressure is the pressure before the flow gets into the oxygenator. So it's usually a little higher than your outlet pressure. This is the pressure that comes out of the oxygenator and goes to the patient. So your inlet pressure is also having two parameters. So low priority, this is your yellow alarm, and your high priority, that's your high red alarm. These ones are usually set by manufacturer as 4,000 and 5,000. And I would just, 500, I'm sorry. I would just leave it right there and I would not change it. These positive pressures are not going to affect your flows directly as much unless there is really a big kink in your arterial pressure that really cannot flow forward. Otherwise, these do not directly affect your flow. The venous does directly affect your flow. You have your delta P. The delta P also has just the two ranges. The low range doesn't mean anything because we don't really care how low our delta P is. We only care when it starts going up. And that's the only value that I prefer to set up. We always say for oxygenator failure due to clots, you want that value to either double up in a very short time or go over 40 or 45. So it's up to you if you want to set it just at 45 or you want to be a little more strict and double up your baseline value and put whatever value that is. So let's say if your value is 15, you double it up and you put 30 as your point of alarm. Doesn't mean that your oxygenator is failing because we're reaching that point. No. All that means is that you're telling this machine, when it reaches that point, I want you to alarm at me. So it doesn't mean that because you set it at 30, you have to change the oxygenator. The flows do not have any parameters that you have to worry about setting up, so just ignore that. Arterial is very similar to your inlet pressure, the same values, 400 for low priority, 500 for high priority. Your arterial temperature only has low priority. There's a few things on this machine that does not have high priority, because if they do change, it's not as significant and you're not going to kill the patient because it has gone out of range. One of those things is your arterial pressure and temperature, and that one has low values and high values. Some of our heater coolers are designed where you turn it on, it goes automatically to 42 degrees. And this is where this is important for you guys to make sure you put it tight. So you want to set your higher limits at least at 37, so it alarms at you if you heat up the patient. And your lower could be 36 probably, because at that point you know that maybe the heater cooler has turned off without you noticing it, and you want this machine to tell you that you're cooling the patient a little too much. Your next value is your mixed venous. Again, this is another value that does not have any high priority. It only has low priority alarm. It has a low range, meaning going below a certain point, or higher range. And that's again up to you where you want to set it. I would be a little more specific with your VV patients because you want to rule out recirculation. So if you keep your mixed venous saturations too high, then you're not going to know if you're recirculating or not. So be a little more tight with your values that you set for your mixed venuses on VV patients compared to VA patients. Going under labs, we have the hemoglobin and hematocrit. Those both are also low priority alarms. They're not going to have high priority alarms for those settings.